we have to talk about the most popular TTRPG setting of all time. You might think it's Forgotten Realms, but then you'll realize that Forgotten Realms is one of many D&D settings. Surely then it's a setting from a game with only one setting, like Golarion in Pathfinder. Except doesn't that ignore all of the Pathfinder players playing in their own homebrew setting? And then you realize the third most popular RPG is Call of Cthulhu, which takes place on Earth, the most popular campaign setting. Well, think about it. Earth is in a lot of TTRPGs and books and novels and films. Earth is, by definition, and it has to be, the most popular campaign setting of all time. Welcome to Mystic Arts, where we'll go to any length to make sure that there is a video every week. My name is Daði, I'm a professional writer and director, and I've been DMing for a little over a decade. And at this point, you're probably wondering, where am I and why am I here? And I'll tell you why I'm here in a second, but first let's talk about the difference between mundanity in fantasy media and magic in fantasy media, because both of them contribute to fantasy, which is separate from mundanity and magic, but rather the amalgamation or the combination of the two. You see, a fantasy setting is innately and inherently magical, and innately and inherently mundane. And the relationship between those two is what's going to define your setting to your players and your audience. And there are plenty of people who have spent ages talking about how to make magic feel like magic in D&D or in your fantasy role-playing game, and I'm certain I'll make a video about that one day, but this video isn't about that. It is about the normal stuff in your D&D setting. Let's talk about how to make your setting's normal stuff feel fantastical. How to take something simple like a pub and elevate it to being your fantasy world's pub, and why we want to do that. Or when you're walking around a town in your local neighborhood and you pass a house that's as ruined and derelict as this one, how can you not go thinking about the story you're working on, the campaign you're working on, the characters you're writing, who lives in this house, why is it so derelict? I don't know, but it's inspiring. Or you think about what a town's main export is. You walk out to the marina and you can see all the ships in the harbor. You can see everything they're working on. Where is it? It's right across from the pub. Look at that. That's the inside of the fjord. I'm out here in Dýrafjörður. Me and my girlfriend AB are up in the West Fjords right now because there is a memorial service for her granddad who died about 10 years ago today. So we went for a basically day-long drive yesterday, and now we're spending our time here among the misty mountains of the West Fjords. So I asked AB what should the next video be about, and she said it should be about how things don't need to be magical in order to be fantastical. Because look at these surroundings. And I am consistently amazed by the breathtaking beauty of it. And while obviously Iceland plays a part in all of that, it also has a lot to do with the fact that I chose to see it. Because I'm an Icelander, I have seen mountains like this all the time. I know what they look like, I know what they're like, but I'm choosing to look at them, to really look and think about them, to be fascinated by them. So I want to invite you to do the same. For me, I think the mundane stuff in your fantasy setting is more interesting than the magic stuff in your fantasy setting. Because the mundane stuff is where all of the buy-in comes in. It is where you get immersed. Fantastical magic is interesting largely as an ethereal concept, but the mundane stuff is where the rubber meets the road and the setting begins to feel real. The more that you can do to bring Earth to your table, the better. Maybe you think, I don't want to play on Earth. I don't know enough about Earth, but I know everything about my setting. Yeah, well, I think that makes perfect sense. But that's also why analog cultures are so prevalent in fantasy. Doesn't matter whether it's Warhammer or Forgotten Realms or Lord of the Rings. There are plenty of campaign settings that are like, hey, this is a culture just like the one that exists on Earth, but this is the fantasy version of it. And then the interesting question to get answered is, what makes it the fantasy version of it? What makes it feel so fantastical? Think about Rohan. It's one of the most fascinating cultures, I think, in that entire story. I don't think there's anything magical about Rohan that makes it so evocative. Yes, there is King Theoden's curse, but the thing that makes it so gripping is actually the horses, which are entirely real. It's the mound, Edoras, which is exaggerated, but real. It's just a Mont and Bailey, really fancy one. Or it's Helm's Deep, the impregnable fortress with the big walls. But it could exist in real life. You know what I mean? Edoras isn't evocative because it's magical. It's the mundane stuff that makes it so evocative. I think that's very interesting. But now, a word from our sponsor.
A new generation of adventurers is on the scene, and this new line of action figures is here to inspire their first quest. Introducing Questers, the sponsor of this week's video, the first Dungeons & Dragons toy line designed specifically for kids. Dungeons & Dragons Questers features 3 distinct collectible scales: creatures, adventurers, and monsters. each offering a trove of D&D inspired surprises. All figures are blind packed collectibles and fully buildable, with interactable parts that allow kids to mix, match, and customize and create their own heroes and beasts. Accompanying each figure is a D20 die and a story starter that encourages kids to tell their own stories with their collection, designed to encourage repeat play, collecting, and creativity. Questers brings the spirit of D&D to life in a format made for younger fans ages 5 and older. Available now at Target, Amazon, and the links in the description.
And now, back to the show. Well, why do we steal from Earth? Well, because Earth is, objectively, real. So anything that connects your setting to Earth, even if it's cherry-picked connections, will make your setting feel more like Earth and therefore feel more real. It really is that simple. Let me tell you a couple of odd stories that are going to help illustrate my point. On our long drive here, we took a stop in many places, and one of them was a graveyard. AB's aunt got out of the car and told us she was going to tell us a story. She walked into the middle of the graveyard next to a mound where there was no gravestone, and she told us about an aunt of hers that died when she was very, very young and was buried here, she said, gesturing at the ground with the unmarked grave. She said there were no records of her being buried here, but the family knew it was true, and so did everybody at the church at the time, but they never wrote it down. And it was at that point we looked across the graveyard and we just saw the mounds and mounds and mounds across it. The graveyard was fairly large, but there were maybe only about 14, 15 headstones in it. And the whole ground was bumpy. All of it. We were standing amongst a plethora of unmarked graves. The graves that were marked were all marked with fairly new headstones, evidently new, but the date of death was all more than 70 years ago for every single one of those graves. Which then means that the gravestones that were there were only there because they were in the living memory of the people who buried them there. AB's aunt then said, one day I'll come here and I'll put down a gravestone right above this grave. That's what every single gravestone in that graveyard was. A marking way after the fact, indicating where those of the past had died and gotten buried without ceremony or a headstone or any record. And of course that is a sad story, but it's also an incredibly evocative one for something like a campaign setting. You don't need to know what kind of magic there's involved, or there doesn't need to be some devil ritual that they're trying to avoid or anything like that. Just the idea of this is a poor region full of poor farmers who can't afford large headstones. Maybe they were made of wood and they rotted. Maybe they're gone. Maybe there was never anything there to begin with. Whatever the reason, the graves go unmarked, and nobody can tell us why. You could choose to make that be an important plot point in your setting or your adventure, or you could just include it as a detail, something for your players to discover that then invites them in to believe in the world. This is how far north I am. That's a patch of snow. It's July. On the southern reaches of Ariston, a continent in my setting, there is a mountain called Skysrock. It is named that because when you look at it at the right time of day and the right season, it appears to float. Floating in the sky, the rock is. Skysrock. And in a high fantasy setting, that might well be the truth, that there is some kind of mountain that floats due to some magic of Mithalar or something if it's the Forgotten Realms. But I thought it'd be more interesting if the mountain's flight was just a trick of the eye. The mountain never flew. It doesn't fly at all. But if you look at it the right time of day, in the right scenery, it's a mirage. The mountain is situated in something of a desert, and at the right angle, a mirage seems to cut the base of the mountain from the rest of the ground, making it appear as though it floats, but it doesn't. But they call it Skysrock, and there are still people who venerate that mountain. Welcome to small town Iceland, where the roads are just straight up empty. So what am I talking about when I say the mundane parts of your fantastical setting? In the broadsheets that I do on Patreon, I'm publishing my own setting, Blackguard. And Blackguard is fantastical in a lot of ways. It's got wizards and magic, ether flux and warp residue. But the thing people want to talk to me about whenever I go talk to anybody about it on a podcast or talk to folks in the comments about it isn't the warp residue. It's industrialization. It's firearms and factories and wealth inequality and robber barons. Those are the things that make it evocative. It's the fact that it's got this root in mundanity that makes it so fantastical, not the magic stuff. I'm going to tell you how to make your campaign setting feel real, like realistic, like the real world. The secret isn't role-playing or describing things. It is about listening, and it is about stealing from the most popular campaign setting, Earth. So, how do you get to that point where you start to understand What makes something feel real? Well, on one hand, I read a lot of Wikipedia. I actually do. Instead of doom scrolling in bed on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, I open up Wikipedia and I go read articles about real historical events and people and things that happened in real life. That is deeply, deeply, deeply inspiring. But there is something else that I do, and that is a practice that I picked up in film school. In film school, we'd call it people watching, but it is a little reductive. It has mostly to do with just sort of taking in the world around you as if you don't know it, and try and reverse engineer it. I want you to have a good hard look at your surrounding. And some of you are gonna leave comments and you're gonna say, well, it's easy for you to say all this, Daði, because you live in this place and I live in that place, and you're gonna talk down to your own sort of local community. But I bet you there are still tourists that go there. Someone somewhere is coming to your community and they are looking at it like a newcomer, and they are excited and they find it breathtaking and amazing. They find your customs enthralling. No matter where you are, there are going to be people who are going to write an Instagram post saying, I find that culture so fascinating because of X, Y, and Z. But then how do you find it? Well, you have to be willing to look for it. To be a foreigner in your own country. The same goes for family, by the way. We are spending all of this time with AB's family. And what happens in those scenarios is that I get to hear stories that their kids roll their eyes at. AB's mom, for instance, jumped out of an airplane. Did a parachute jump. To some of the kids in the room, they were hearing that story for the third or fourth time, and I was sitting there listening to her experience, taking in just how it feels to be in that situation. What is it like to be in those dangerous situations, or things that make your blood rush and get you excited? Because I was getting a first-hand account of it. Because if you open your mind, you're about to discover that your family is also really cool. I, for example, find AB's family to be utterly fascinating. Two of them were there during the sort of genesis of CGI in computer-generated images, figuring out how to calculate light bounces on polygons in the early days of Apple. A couple of them served abroad as UN peacekeepers and crisis emergency response people. One of them even told me a story about being held at bazooka point on an airport until his life was saved by Kofi Annan. People are fascinating. You find all kinds of incredible stories amongst normal folks just talking about doing their job. Or in the spirit of the World Cup just wrapping up, I remember thinking my dad's obsession with football was kind of cringe. And then I remembered that he was, for a brief time, a professional footballer. Or my mom's stories of working as a nurse in the emergency room, and the kind of tales that comes with that. You have to figure out how to listen to your family like you're a stranger. Gondor and Minas Tirith is incredibly evocative in a way that I think is inherently fantastical. You know, it's got these high walls, it's carved out of the mountain, yada, yada, yada. But that is also technically feasible, even if it is intense and heightened and fantastical. It's not Arcane. In fact, when you think about Arcane, the show, the social divide between the high class and the low class, the lower city and the higher city, the outfits, the way they treat each other, the way they talk to their elites, either with reverence or entire disrespect. It's not the magic rocks that make it so special. It's everything else.
So the next time you go world building, spend a little bit more time wondering about the mundane stuff in your setting, because that's going to help ground everything. Whether that's in the form of cultural analogs, or what kind of pubs there are in town, what kind of food this culture eats, what do they do for entertainment. Once you bring all those elements in, inspired by your own people watching, from listening to your relatives or looking at your environment, you are going to make your setting more like Earth, and therefore more realistic and more fantastical at the same time. And that's where we'll pick it up next time. This channel is run by me and my girlfriend. If you want to support us directly, come check out the Broadsheet, available on Patreon and coming soon in print. If you're coming to Gen Con, come by the CRWN Studios booth. Meet me there on Thursday and Saturday between 10 and 11 o'clock, and I will sign your copy if you bring it to me, or anything else you want me to sign. But if you're feeling especially generous, go like this video, comment, share, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified when we release new videos. And until next time, keep studying the mystic arts.